Good to see everyone again. 3 weeks in my kuti. We've reached chapter 15, which is called Unshakeable Freedom. And the Pali for this chapter, we got books passed around for people to look at. Jnanancha paname dasanang uddapadi akuppame vimutti ayamantima jati nattidhani punnabhavoti, which means, the knowledge and vision arose in me. Unshakable is my deliverance. This is the last birth. There is no further becoming. Unshakable freedom. And the picture that we have here is, again, we've got some of the knot work, but this is what's called a Tibetan knot of eternity. So it's transformed from the Celtic knotwork mode into a Tibetan knotwork mode. And then this yantra, this geometrical pattern in the middle, is more out of the Vedic tradition. So there's other different influences coming in here. The Buddha's face has disappeared, all except for the smile, rather like the Cheshire Cat in Alice Through the Looking Glass, I think it was. And the Buddha's hand reaching down to touch the earth. And all around the edges here, you have many little faces representing faces from countless births over innumerable ages. Finally, the Buddha asserts that his awakening to truth is not just a momentary vision. It's no passing thing. What makes him so sure? After all, everyone experiences certainties that don't always prove reliable. How many relationships begin with the conviction that you're the one for me, only to find out a year or two later that you're not? In the places where I've lived as a bhikkhu, quite a few people have come to the monastery with the absolute certainty that they're going to be monks or nuns, and that this is the only way to live. Not many of those people make it through the preliminary stages. It's not that they're lying, it's just that they don't always understand the nature of conviction. Conviction based on belief and affirmation is unreliable. Belief by its very nature needs to be constantly affirmed. Left unattended, it wilts. When religion is based on belief, the adherents must keep on meeting to tell each other how wonderful it all is, or go out and convert someone else. Getting fresh converts boosts one's own belief to no end. But why is there this demand to believe? Does truth or God really need to be believed in? This point about that kind of certainty that I would completely echo from my own experience. That it's a comment by Ajahn Sucitto that it's not universal, but it's not uncommon for somebody to enter into the monastery and think, yeah, it's absolutely obvious. This is totally the thing for me. There's no other options that are available for me that are remotely interesting, and I want to commit myself to monastic life for the end of my days. And I certainly had that feeling myself. Obviously, so far so good. But I remember when I was very new in the monastery in Thailand, and it was all absolutely vividly clear. It was completely just there was a total open door, and it was blazingly obvious that this was the only way of life that was interesting and valuable to me. And I remember many of these conversations, sort of philosophical conversations, happened down at the dyeing shed where you do your monastic laundry, sort of hang out, and because washing your robes would take quite a few hours, and building the fire to heat up the water and the chips of jackfruit tree and so on, and usually occasion a few random cups of tea with each other. And I remember one time talking with this monk Aranyapo, an English monk. He'd already been a novice and then left and come back, and then I think he came back as a layman and then left and then came back a third time. and I'd been a bhikkhu for about 3 or 4 years by this point. And I was sitting down in the dying shed. I said, "Well, you just shave your head and go forth, and then it's just downhill from there on." And at that point, I didn't know much of his history at that point, and he gave me this look. "You have no idea." "Listen, son, if you had any clue what you're walking into, you would never, ever, ever say that." But that, it's like being in love with someone. It's just, or enthusiastic. It's obvious. It's fantastic. It all makes perfect sense. And often that kind of idealistic vision of what you're stepping into is quite radically different from the actuality of what you step into. And it's not uncommon for not so much nowadays, because people have a bit more information. But in the early days, people would show up at the monastery in Thailand, and they'd say, I've given up all my worldly goods. I've wrapped up all my affairs. I want to be a monk for the rest of my life, and there's nothing else that's interesting to me or of any value. And then they find out what the routine of the monastery is, and they discover no supper, like nothing. So we eat once a day at 8:30 in the morning, and then the next day at 8:30 in the morning, and a couple of times a week we have a cup of tea. And then that absolutely unwavering conviction it suddenly turns into a ticket on the train back to Bangkok. Or discovering that you're not allowed to keep your own stash of chocolate. There was one fellow came from all the way from Europe, I think from Austria it was, and extremely committed, dedicated, and had written all these letters affirming how he was destined for the holy life, and it was the only thing he wished to do with the rest of his days. And when he arrived at Wat Pah Nanachat and found out that he couldn't keep his own supply of chocolate, and that you could actually hardly even buy chocolate in Thailand in those days, it was a complete shock and a heartbreaker, and he was back on the plane to Austria. So this is a long-winded way of saying that between the idea and the fact there falls the shadow, as T.S. Eliot put it. Our idea of the way things are and the actuality of the way things are is very, very different. Like a photograph of the sea is not the same as getting in the sea and swimming. So, why is there this demand to believe? Does truth or God really need to be believed in? When inspiration initiates and promotes conviction, it aims to preserve a particular feeling, role, or image. The image then easily becomes a stereotype. Familiar examples we all know about are the loving couple, always sharing and caring, growing together through life, or the serene, gentle monk, abiding in the peace of non-attachment, delving into the profundities of the mind, composed and wise. As ideals, they're fine, but one can't expect to realize them without going through the trials posed by the things that challenge them. With regards to monastic training, confronting the hindrances, living together with other people as they go through their changes and growing pains, and the duties of maintaining a monastery as a place for people to practice, all involve something other than liking the idea of peace and mental refinement. Inspiration alone doesn't usually provide the practical know-how to help you see the need or appreciate the means for discerning effort. If you're just interested in inspiration, it's generally easier to dump one idea and find another idea, situation, partner, or cause, and go through the work of bringing the ideal into the realm of reality. Continuously switching loyalties is the samsara shuffle. It's a wonderful term. The samsara shuffle, which is based on desire for a particular condition, a certain place, a scene, a mood, an atmosphere, a role, or a particular state of mind. Again, going back to a monastic perception of things, one comment I often make is that, again speaking from my own experience, is when you're an anagarika or a novice, you know exactly how the Ajahn should run the monastery. And so you have like a little internal commentary going on saying, well, I would never do it like that, or why does he do it that way? Oh, that's awful. if I was when I'm the abbot of the monastery, then I'm going to have it like this. No, never allow anyone to do that, and we always do it this way, and never have it that way. And so when you're an anagarika or a novice, or I'm sure it's the same for the nuns community, junior nuns, anagarikas, it's absolutely clear. So you're 100% certain when you're an anagarika. Then when you've taken on the higher precepts, then and you're a new monk or a new nun, then you're about 80% sure about how the abbot should run the place, and you know what it should, how it should all be done. By the time you've been in the robes for 5 or 6 years, you're 50% sure about how it all should be run. And then by the time you get to being a Thera, you're like 25% sure. And then by the time you're a Mahathera and you're actually running the monastery, you realize it's never, ever, ever like the way that the in fact, your mind stops creating ideals of how people should be. quite honestly, it just a decade or two ago, my mind just said, no, people are not the way you expect them to be, and that you can't reasonably create an image of how you think it should be, but instead you are working with the way people actually are. But we start out from that place thinking, well, if I was in charge, I know how this should be, and the should takes the center stage, and the reality is off the periphery. And as the years go by, then the reality, ideally, gets to the center, and the should is just like these sort of little fluttering bits of cobweb around the edges that don't really have any strength or meaning. So, continuously switching loyalties is the samsara shuffle, which is based on desire for a particular condition, a certain place, a scene, a mood, an atmosphere, a role, or a particular state of mind. So if we're fixated on, it should be this way, and it's not like that here, then if we're entering in the samsara shuffle, then we just go to another place where we can try and get that, or something that approximates to that, or this place isn't good enough, or they're too strict, or they're too slack, or there's too much food, or there's not enough food, or it's too luxurious, or it's too austere. The Ajahn never says anything. The Ajahn won't shut up. Sometimes both within 5 minutes, The Buddha looked at the fundamental conditions of life, the conditions of the body and mind, and not special or fascinating ones. Rather than approving or disapproving of any of them, he looked at the inherent nature of them all. All phenomena are caused. They arise dependent on conditions. Mental phenomena depend on interest, belief, and other supporting conditions, which include some form of desire. All of these are subject to change and can only be temporarily sustained. For this reason, things are unsatisfactory. It follows that no condition can be an absolute truth, nor can it be the true quality of a person or any living being. Whether the self, quote-unquote, is being masqueraded as a voice in the mind, myself, or a bird on a branch, some other self, it doesn't matter. All conditions which arise are impermanent and not self. Yet an unenlightened mind sees the world from the perspective of conscious experience based in desire, becoming, and birth and death. The experience of self, which the mind holds instinctively, goes against all reason. So what he's saying here, as I would read it and simplify it a little bit, this is saying that our mind creates an impression of saying there's this thing and that thing, there's in here and there's out here and there's out there, and all those impressions the mind puts together to say this is me here in the world out there and how to function in the world. All of those impressions are caused. They have things that contribute to them. They have factors that they depend on, and that these are all in a state of change. And so the things that we like, then we can't keep them. The things that we dislike, they won't go away when we want them to. So therefore, that lack of control or that lack of ownership leads to things being unsatisfactory. Yeah. Just a simple thing like illness, like you've got a sore throat, or you've got a twisted ankle, or a digestive problem, or sore knees. People have to sit on chairs because their knees won't let them sit on the floor. So it's like, there it is. the conditions of the body preclude our control. We can't just say, "Oh, I'll just decide to sit in full lotus on the floor for 3 hours," because the body will say, "No, that's not doable." So that what it's saying is that as soon as we take those approximations, or the way that we perceive or represent the reality, as soon as we take those approximations to be absolute, then, or something that's real and solid, then we have to be disappointed. Just consider what gives rise to the conviction that one has an identity which is found within a body. Not the thought, but the emotional conviction, "This is my body." Isn't that conviction based on attachment to bodily pleasure and pain? The sense of actually being a pleasant bodily feeling is ecstatic, however impermanent. It feels like a higher, more unified sense of being than the diffuse bric-a-brac of ordinary consciousness. It feels like the real thing. Unfortunately, the experience is fleeting and is a setup for being put into the firing line of receiving unpleasant feeling as the real thing. So if our sense of "I am the body" is the real thing, then when the body's comfortable or experiencing pleasure, then I am that pleasure. But then as that changes, and then there's a sore knee or an indigestion or a headache or whatever, too hot, too cold, then I am too hot, I am uncomfortable, I am this pain. Hence, the violent swings that sensual indulgence puts you through. From another perspective, there can be pleasant and unpleasant mental feelings based on the body. Being told that one's body is wonderful or disgusting is liable to cause a certain amount of identification. Yet, if one's reference point is that this body is mostly made up of protein chains of hydrocarbon molecules, or of flesh, bones, nerves, and various kinds of liquid, there isn't a sense of self. And this factual description is more accurate than the value judgments our emotions believe in. What about the mental processes that give rise to the belief that we are our thoughts? Belief in the states of the mind is really based on aspects of interest, either through desire or aversion. I approve of these states, they are me. I disapprove of these, they're also me. Then the good me has to get rid of the bad me. And despite my efforts to get rid of it, the bad me keeps popping up like a jungle gorilla. That's guerrilla, as in a freelance warrior rather than a large ape. When we think the campaign is too tough, we look for another cause to believe in. We switch to another set of thoughts, interests, and attitudes. With the mind, the very creation of phenomena is conditioned by the mental act of believing that they are aspects of our self. When you take the special and personal labels off, when what we experience is the same as everybody else, all phenomena amount to nothing much. And in one way, they are all the same. They're all impermanent, dukkha, and not self. And as such, they no longer emotionally bind the heart. When that happens, the wizard's spell is broken. That disenchantment, which with conditions, is what the process of insight awareness is all about. That's a very beautiful description of what we're doing with Vipassana meditation, is looking at that flow of I'm seeing, I'm hearing, I'm understanding, I'm not understanding, I'm hot, I'm cold, I'm heavy, I'm light, I'm hearing, and taking all of those personalizing habits and saying, well, wait a minute, hang on, that there is hearing, but to say there's a person in here, there's a separate individual, independent me who's the hearer, is adding something onto it. There's hearing, certainly. There is feeling, certainly. There is seeing, there's remembering, there is choosing. But it's through Vipassana and the application of those reflections, it's in a way drawing the attention back from the I like, I don't like, this is good, that's bad, that's inside, that's outside, and taking a more broad and open viewpoint to say, well, whether it's inside or outside, it's changing. Whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, it's changing. Whether it's wholesome or unwholesome, it's changing. And so that looking at things from a broader and more open, unbiased perspective, then helps to, in a sense, see that all the different aspects of what we call ourselves are parts of the natural order, so that we can say, yeah, but Anagarika Amen is not the same as Anagarika crystal. They're different people. But it could be easily the case that when Amen came here, just before 6 o'clock, he breathed out. Some carbon dioxide floats through the air, or is part of the air, floats over, and then Anagarika crystal breathes it in. And so what was Anagarika Amen half an hour ago, you now call Anagarika crystal, or vice versa. People don't like to think of this, but we're all shedding skin cells all the time. All that dust that people hoover up in the morning and clear off the surfaces, that's mostly us, human skin. And so even though you might feel it's probably against the precepts, but we're not eating on purpose, but we are probably inhaling bits of each other all the time. So where does Anagarika Amen stop and Anagarika crystal begin? Where does Ajahn Amaro stop and Hertfordshire begin? That there's the designation of this is a separate person from another. It's got validity in the conventional world, but taking the viewpoint of insight, then in a sense letting go of the differences and looking at the commonality and the natural quality of all experience, and that very change of view is what liberates. And it's not one of the points I find I need to make on this is we're not trying to turn ourselves into some sort of data reception unit where we're sort of just disengaging or abstracting the mind from the world in a false way, but rather to let that way of seeing be simply a matter of letting go of the addition of the ego-centered personalizing habits, in a sense clarifying the vision to see that this is nature, that's nature, everything is part of nature. So it's really nature knowing itself is what we're experiencing in this moment. We call it me talking to you, or you hearing me, or us experiencing this room, but this is really nature experiencing nature, right? And what aspect of your mind or your body is not part of nature? So we like to use expressions like, I like to go out and be in nature. Well, to which you say, well, how do you get away from nature? This is it. Yeah. So that it's rather than trying to sterilize the mind or nullify feeling, it's more a way of clearing away the distortions that come from ego-centered habits of self-view, and then there's much more of that clarity and a sense of unification of experience, so that seeing things in terms of anicca, dukkha, anatta is not sort of nullifying or sterilizing experience, but rather it brings it alive. And I also like the way Ajahn Sucitto uses the word disenchantment with a double meaning, because so for those for whom English is not your first language, which the majority of people here, the word disenchantment in English usually means to stop being excited about something, or to stop being fascinated or caught up in something. But the word enchantment also means a magical spell, like someone who's a witch or a wizard they put a spell on someone to make them act or see things in different ways, or puts them to sleep, so that you say someone's under an enchantment, like in the fairy tale of Sleeping Beauty. She was under an enchantment to sleep for 100 years until the prince came along. So disenchantment, which is usually in the Buddhist sense meant to be losing your excitement or losing your fascination with something, he sort of tweaks the meaning a little bit, or uses a slightly that different shade of meaning of being freed from the spell, like Sleeping Beauty. When she woke up from the sleep, she was awake and she could function. So it's the spell of delusion being lifted, so things can be seen in terms of reality. From where does the Buddha see things? Isn't that yet another position that the mind can attach to? what is the Buddha's wisdom based upon? What happens to it when he dies? If we use the Buddha as a sign, the no position of the awakened mind can be made clearer. In considering the Buddha, one can't really say that the body is the Buddha, nor are the feelings, or the sense consciousness, or the ideas and thoughts and so on. The world of the khandhas is what is seen and not grasped by Buddhas. But the Buddhas have the 5 khandhas. So all we can say is that the existence of the Buddha can only be designated in relationship to them. And when the 5 khandhas cease, we can't make any more designations. So, ultimate truth can't be contained in any concept. Can you conceive of the inconceivable? Not being conceived, it can't be born. Not being born, it can't die. Being beyond birth and death and all conceiving, it has no position and no characteristics. It has no self. Well, there are some very weighty or spacious principles there. There's a very interesting and significant sutta. There's a couple of them that are related, but it's a discourse that the Buddha gives to this young monk Anuruddha. And Anuruddha has been approached by some wanderers from a different group, and they've asked the Bhikkhu Anuruddha, what does the Buddha say about what happens to enlightened beings after they pass away? Do they exist? He says the Buddha hasn't spoken about that. So, well, do they not exist? So the Buddha hasn't spoken about that. Well, do they both exist and not exist? Well, the Buddha doesn't speak about that. Do they neither exist nor not exist? And then again, Anuruddha says, well, the Blessed One, the Buddha, doesn't speak about this either. And they say, well, you must be either an idiot or someone who's just gone forth recently, because if you understood these principles, you'd be able to give us a proper answer. And and so the comment that the Anuruddha makes is that the Buddha describes things outside of the consideration of the 5 these 4 elements of what's called a quadrilemma, these 4 different aspects. The Buddha describes the reality as being outside of that. So that seemed to be like a pretty fair answer, and if you're familiar with Buddha's teachings. But when Anuruddha goes to the Buddha and asks and recounts that dialogue and says, well, this is what I said to these other wanderers, did I say it correctly, or was that not correct? What would you say, Venerable Sir? And the Buddha said, well, Anuruddha, you didn't put it absolutely correctly, because you said the Buddha describes things outside of these 4 considerations, and the implication seems to be that to talk about it in that way, it still hints that there's some other kind of being or not being, or some sort of other place of some character that is where enlightened beings go, but you just haven't caught it with those particular 4. And so he says that's not correct to phrase it in that way. It's a subtle point, but if you want to read more about it, it's in that chapter of the island called the unapprehendability of the enlightened. But anyway, what the Buddha then goes through an analysis very similar to what Ajahn Sucitto is describing here. He said to Anuruddha, can you say that the Tathagata is in the 5 khandhas? He said, well, no, you can't say that the Tathagata is in the 5 khandhas. Well, can you say that he's apart from, he's outside of the 5 khandhas? And the 5 khandhas being the body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, consciousness. He said, well, no, you can't say that the Tathagata is outside them. Well, can you say that the Tathagata is the 5 khandhas? No, you can't say he is them. Can you say he is not them? No, you can't say he's not them. Can you say that the Tathagata has the 5 khandhas? No, you can't say he has them. Can you say he does not have the 5 khandhas? No, you can't say that. And the Buddha said, exactly. So what I teach now and formally is suffering and the end of suffering. So what he's saying, if you can follow the drift, is that where he's asking Anuruddha, so does the Buddha have the body and mind? Does he not have the body and mind? Is he in the body and mind? Is he apart from the body and mind? Does he own the body? Is he the same thing as the body and mind? Is he not the same thing as the body and mind? So it's having, being, and location. And Anuruddha said, no, you can't. None of those are relevant. And the Buddha said, right. So any way of saying that, defining what the enlightened mind is in terms of the five khandhas is going to be inaccurate. So he said, what I teach is suffering and the end of suffering. So it's a subtle point, but it's in a way it reflects that sense of, yeah, but there really is this being. And that what the Buddha is trying to do is to say, as soon as you conceive a being that begins and ends and has an existence in a particular place and time, that's wide of the mark. And so any way of conceiving a being that's defined by space or time and existence, it has to be wrong. So any way of conceiving that is bound to be wide of the mark. So don't even think about that. All you need to do is to focus on dukkha and the ending of dukkha. So it's rather like the actuality of what the Dhamma is really inconceivable. We can only think in terms of sketchy images that represent that. You can't describe it. It's like you can't write mathematical formulas for everything that's going on in every instrument in an orchestra. But you can use your instrument and you can listen and you can play in tune with the rest of the orchestra. That you can do. You can know when you're in tune and you can know when you're out of tune. That's all you need to know. Exactly all of the mechanics of every instrument, you don't need to know. And exactly what the music is, you don't need to define that. Just pay attention to dukkha and the ending of dukkha. Is the mind in harmony with nature, or is it not? That's all. And so the thinking mind is always trying to sort of create not always, but it inclines towards sort of creating an image of how things are, and defining so what is in a specific and clear way. But what this is pointing to is that the concept can never really match the truth. It's impossible. And so because the reality's got far too many dimensions and is far too is vast and inconceivable, so that any representation, any concept that the mind creates about that is bound to be short of the mark. As he says, the ultimate truth can't be contained in any concept. So while I was in my retreat, this image came to mind, which I might share with you now. So if you take what you call a stick figure of a person, so like a little a round circle for the head, a vertical line for the body, a couple of legs, and a little horizontal line for the arms, and so that stick image, say representing all and everything that can be said and has ever been said or known about human beings. Every poem ever written, every newspaper published, every description of the physiology, the biology, the psychology, everything that's possible to know about human beings. Okay? So if you say, the stick figure, you can say represents like one byte of information. And everything that can be known about people, about human beings, and has ever been said or studied or fills the libraries, would be like 100 billion gigabytes of information. So you have one byte is proportional to 100 billion gigabytes. So that but then I would say that the reality of Dhamma, the reality of the way things are, is as just as the one byte of the stick figure is proportional to the 100 billion gigabytes of what has ever been said about people, then if everything that was said about the people is then proportional to the actuality of Dhamma. If you can follow, simple proportions, so that the it's just as a little stick figure of a person. Say, well, that's that's a person, and then the gazillions of libraries filled with information that say what a person is. That if you compare the one with the other, I'd say that all the information, everything that we conceive or try and describe about what we are, that's as tiny and as insignificant, that's as minuscule and as unidimensional as a little stick figure in comparison to the actuality of the way things are. So I don't know if that's a clear enough image, but it's sort of popped into my mind a couple of days ago. So, and Sucitto puts it much more simply: the ultimate truth can't be contained in any concept. Or another little image that came to mind, it's rather like if you take, say, a square meter of the surface of the sea, just like, and you compare that square meter of the surface of water with everything that's going on in all the seas all around the world. You say, well, that's the sea. That little square meter on the surface, well, that's the sea. But then the sea is all of the waters of the planet and every being living in them and all of their tides and currents and such like. Or that kind of vastness of scale. The Buddha also came up with many other similar analogies, but it helps to get the mind to be boggled. So when we say, well, the Dhamma is inconceivable, it's like, oh yeah, like can't quite figure it out, but it's in a way it's helpful to think, well, no, you really, really, really can't figure it out. The conceptual mind has nothing remotely like the number of dimensions and capacities to represent that. But the genius of the Buddha was to recognize you don't need to. All that's needed is dukkha and the ending of dukkha. That's all we really need. When we can't hold on to the ultimate truth and everything else is dukkha, the problem becomes one of sustaining the motivation for practice. Maybe if we were sufficiently high-minded, we could sustain endeavor without the support of developing something, making progress, or feeling happier. But that isn't how it is. One's practice should be to carry out every action with a one-pointed attention to do the right thing, irrespective of personal cost or gain. Moreover, the various pleasant and unpleasant feelings that arise in the body and mind should not be adhered to, nor should one cling to the peacefulness of the neutral feelings. To abandon such preferences, however, requires the mind to be constantly in touch with the ground of consciousness within which phenomena arise. To do this requires a major change, not only of energy and attention, but of ingrained value systems. Most people's problem is that their mind still remains unconvinced of the value of Nibbana. Whatever the theory, when it comes down to the actuality, we're still turned on by the sensory world, despite getting burned by it. How does one develop the taste for the unconditioned? Is it just through being disillusioned with everything else? This sounds like a pretty grim prospect. ... However, the insight teachings of the Buddha are practical and instructive rather than inspirational. For this path, aspiration comes from faith rather than belief. Faith is the quality that sustains the heart without the need to have something else to hold on to. It's akin to courage or the willingness to try something out. So that's a very good description of faith. I mean, he goes on a bit more later on. He talks about the unconvincing nature of Nibbana, so that'll be a point that we come back to, and how to develop a taste for the unconditioned. But the difference between faith and belief is very, very significant, because in English the two words are used pretty much interchangeably, but they're quite different in Buddhist psychology. So belief is based on self-view and a fear. That it's like there's a fear of the unknown, and there's an uncertainty and a feeling of insecurity. A belief is some structure, an idea, or a principle that the mind holds on to push away that feeling of insecurity. It's something that it suppresses that fear because we want this to be true, and so it's an emotional reaction based on self-view. I'm insecure. I don't know what's going to happen next. So I believe that this is good. I believe this is going to help. I believe that this is going to happen. I believe that this makes me secure. So belief, in terms of how it's used in the Buddhist sense, is that emotional reaction to insecurity. Faith is more what's called saddha, and it's not based on self-view at all, but rather it's that quality of courage, being ready to meet the unknown, so that there's still, it's an emotional tone to it, how that mind relates to uncertainty, but it's the readiness to, in a sense, step into the uncertain. You still don't know what's going to happen, there's still the unknown, but you're ready to take a step forward, but there's not the sense of risk or loss or fear. So in a way, a simpler way of expressing it is to say that when the attitude is based on self-view, then belief is what fills the unknown. When the heart meets, when is not based on, the attitude is not based on self-view, then the heart meets the unknown with a quality of faith, and then that brings with it a sense of mystery or wonderment rather than fear. There isn't a sense of dread of what's going to happen next, but it's still the unknown is still the unknown, but there's a sense of wonderment rather than anxiety, so that it's a completely different way of relating to the principle of anicca. So it's akin to courage, or the willingness to try something out. Dhamma practice has to begin with this, otherwise there is no real giving of oneself, and no personal inquiry. With one moment of faith, we practice one moment of letting go. But one moment of Dhamma has a furthering quality. The practice is one moment at a time, and yet very firm and supportive. The Buddha explained it as a natural process. Bhikkhus, for one who is virtuous, there is no need to wish, may freedom from remorse arise in me, because it's in accordance with nature that freedom from remorse arises in one who is virtuous. For one who is free from remorse, there is no need to wish, may joy arise in me, because it's in accordance with nature that joy arises in one who is free from remorse. Similarly, joy is the foundation for rapture, rapture is the foundation for calm, calm is the foundation for contentment, contentment the foundation for concentration, concentration the foundation for insight, and insight the foundation for dispassionate realization, and realization is the basis for liberation. So also there's a very similar teaching that is related to dependent origination. It's also known as the transcendent dependent arising, and it's also has the same sort of structure in the latter part of it. But if you're familiar with the cycle of dependent origination, of starting off with ignorance, leading to formations, and the mind and body, and the six senses, and then six senses conditioning feeling, which conditions craving, which conditions clinging and becoming, and then birth and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. So in that particular sutta, it's called the transcendent dependent arising, then rather than the sorrow, lamentation, and so on, conditioning further ignorance and then leading some more spins of the wheel of becoming, the experience of dukkha, that sorrow and lamentation, becomes the cause for faith. And so there's like an exit point from the cycle right there, and the faith arises from an intuition in the face of dukkha that this can't be the whole story. There has to be a way out of this. I've been going around and around and around in these circles for so long that this can't be everything. There's got to be an alternative. Now, what's the alternative? And In another teaching, the Buddha said that dukkha ripens in one of two ways, either in further suffering, either in more dukkha, or in search. And that search is exactly the same as this faith. It's like, there must be a different way. I'm caught up in these habits, these cycles of love and fear and so on, hate. There's got to be an alternative to it. So just maybe to tell one last little story. It's one of my favorite illustrations of this quality of faith or courage is I heard this story many years ago, and it was about a student, a young woman who was applying for a place at Oxford and Cambridge, to the Oxford and Cambridge entrance exams. And when you do these Oxbridge entrance exams, you have a paper on your own particular subject. Like if you're going to do natural sciences, you'd have papers on chemistry and physics and so on. If you're going to study French, you'd have papers on French and so on. And the other half of the exam is called the general paper. And on the general paper, you have something like 30 questions to choose, and you choose two to, at least in my day, and I think in this instance. So you have 2 questions to answer. You choose 2 subjects out of 30. And the general paper and the subject paper have equal weight. So even if you get up on your subject, if you don't do well in your general paper, you won't get in. So it matters a lot. And you've only got 2 essays to write in a 3-hour period. And so, the essay questions can be all kinds of things, like, wouldn't it have been better if William the Conqueror had lost the Battle of Hastings? Discuss. Or it might be something like, what's wrong with the Conservative Party? Or it might be like, why top hats? It can be all kinds of, just to see how your mind works, how you can make a point or several points, and what your imagination and your intellect can do. And so one of the questions on this paper was, what is bravery? And this young woman wrote a 2-word answer in response to this question, which was in response to the question, what is bravery? She wrote, "This is." And that was the whole essay. And you never get 10 out of 10 on a general paper question. She got 10 out of 10. So that's the story anyway. So that they thought, okay, we could use her. That's the kind of mind we need. So that readiness to go into the unknown and to not be afraid, and not to be bound up by that limitation. There was obviously that was a bit more of a worldly kind of confidence, but it represents that same kind of quality. So, if there's any questions or comments, reflections people have, please don't be shy. Okay, very good. I'm not sure whether people are just stunned into silence or numb or totally awakened. Freedom, unshakable deliverance has been realized. But, we'll leave it there for today and then carry on. We're just over halfway through, so I thought I was going to do more than this during the retreat, but it looks like we'll probably craft it so that we'll just keep going with this until we reach the end of the retreat time. Continuing with this chapter on unshakable freedom, which is quite a long one. Just to remind everyone, this is a commentary on the words Jnanancha paname dasanang uddapadi akuppa me vimutti ayamantima jati nattidhani punabhavoti. The knowledge and vision arose in me. Unshakable is my deliverance. This is the last birth. There is no further becoming. So, if you will recall, then we finished last time with the Buddha's teaching about the sort of chain of causation, virtuous. There's no need to wish. May freedom from remorse arise in me, and so on, leading up to liberation. So that that this sutta is often known as liberation is a natural process, or the Upanisa Sutta, which means a proximal cause. So the proximal cause for, say, for freedom from remorse is being virtuous, and so on. So it's the particular term or name for that chain of causation. Motivation without selfish desire, attachment or becoming is a matter of sustaining the Dhamma and letting the practice bring up our fundamental wholesomeness. In brief, we develop qualities in which we can trust. The cultivation of Dhamma, remember, has two paths, the mundane and the supramundane. The mundane path begins with setting up conditions like living honestly, without intoxication, aggression or greed. These are favourable for peace of mind. Moral integrity is the best foundation for meditation. Then meditation makes your mind more calm and clear, and these are pleasant and fruitful conditions. Moreover, if you sustain the practice, it gives you the insight to realize that the mundane is ultimately not good enough, and that there is a supramundane. Also, an easy way of thinking this is a mundane path is where there's practice of wholesome qualities, but they're also mixed in with a sense of self-view. So I am practicing generosity, I am keeping the sila, I am developing meditation, so that the qualities are wholesome, but they're still tied to some worldly attitudes. The supramundane practice is based on the same moral conditions, but brings the mind's attention to the self-view, the judging, wanting, comparing, complaining, besieged ego that is trying to find exactly the right situation for itself. It uses conditions in the body, the mind and the world for reflection on the unsatisfactoriness of seeing things in personal terms. The supramundane path, in its entirety, is aimed at shifting the mind to fit the world rather than expecting the world to fit the mind. It's a very neat way of phrasing it. The certainty of that path is quite different. It's not based on propping up one's faith with attachment to conditions, such as great teachers, lots of fellow disciples, and scintillating teachings. Those things, if they are around, are a bonus. But when the teacher has confessed to a drinking problem and everyone leaves except you and the janitor, you can keep going if your practice is based on your own insights. The unshakable insight isn't dependent on having a series of inspiring perceptions to believe in. Perceptions are dukkha, and the need for belief is dukkha. True insight has a delight and uplift based on not holding on to the conditions of the body and the mind. It's called the unconditioned, and it has the taste of freedom. And there's a quote from the Anguttara Nikaya, Book of the Eights. Just as the great ocean has only one taste, that of salt, even so, the teaching and the discipline has only one taste, the taste of liberation. Also, this comment that Ajahn Sucitto makes here about whether your faith is based on being constantly inspired. This is something that in those of you who listen to many of Lumpur Sumedho's Dhamma talks over the years will have heard him say often how when he was a young monk at Wat Pah Pong, he would consider, I'm inspired by Ajahn Chah and I delight in him, but what would I do if he let me down or disappointed me? And he would often say things like, what would I say if Ajahn Chah ran off and got married to a 16-year-old? Or what would I do if Ajahn Buddhadasa said, Buddhism is all a farce, it's all a joke, Christianity is the way to go? Or the Dalai Lama said, I'm leaving the monkhood and I'm going to join the Communist Party. What would you do? And he would quite seriously take those thoughts into his mind and consider, well, what would I do? How would I handle that? And just to look and see what reaction there would be there. And so what he would say was that he realized, well, even if that did all happen, I would just carry on being a bhikkhu. Why would that have any effect on my commitment and my faith? And so that through reflecting on that kind of basis for faith, then he could see that it was not dependent or not totally reliant on external conditions. So Ajahn Sucitto continues. Let's take a look at the painting for some further reflection. The awakened one, as I mentioned yesterday, this you can also, if the book's being passed around, you can see for yourself. You have this sort of a Cheshire cat image of the awakened one, with the face is dissolved into light except for the smile, and then you have this yantra, the very center, and then the hand reaching down to touch the earth, and then the myriad faces reflecting the past lives around the edges, and then a star-filled sky in the background. The awakened one sits in the meditation posture in a non-specific place in this world system. The central picture is framed by many faces, some animal, some human. These represent the many births of the great being, the Buddha to be. If there is no self, what is it that goes through a series of lives? The Buddha firmly rejected reincarnation, which is the theory that an immaterial being is contained within the body and, after the breakup of the body, goes to another body. He once sternly rebuked a bhikkhu who asserted that the same consciousness carried over from one life to another. That's in the Maha Tanha Sankhaya Sutta, Sutta number 38 in the Majjhima. This, of course, is a form of self-view. Yet on other occasions, the Buddha would talk about a person's future destination after the death of the body, or about his own previous births in a very matter-of-fact way. The apparent contradiction only becomes resolved when we understand the Buddha's use of language on the one hand, and on the other, insightfully investigate the process of life. Regarding the use of language, birth is the arising of the five khandhas, which we experience as self. Using self and I as conventional terms for ease of expression, we can talk about the self-experience, being born. However, the practice of insight points to form arising dependent on consciousness, which in turn is affected by intention and attention, and so on. So nothing has separate existence. Aspects of an interdependent, conditioned whole mesh and interact with other aspects in a field of conditionality that we can liken to a karmic biosystem. Nice phrase. For this reason, in accordance with the Buddha's own usage, I refrain from using the word rebirth, which implies something that was before pertains in the future, and refers simply to birth, jati, that keeps our inquiry within the linguistic and experiential framework of the Buddha. Well, I fully acknowledge Ajahn Sucitto's great knowledge and intelligence, but there actually is a word, punabhava, which means again becoming, which literally translates as the literal translation of rebirth. So it's true, you can just say jati as in birth, but the Buddha does, he's not correct when he says the Buddha doesn't actually use the word for rebirth, when that word punabhava is, part of the Buddha's expression of things, and I think it, if I'm remembering correctly, it actually even appears in the Dhammacakka Sutta, but I'm not being able to. Punabhavoti, yeah, Punabhavoti is Nandiraga Sahagata, I think it is. Anyway, it's I don't think the passage is going to throw itself at me. Usually when you're looking for it, then it's the one that you can't see. But let's see if I can find it.
Near the very end. I think it's in the last stanzas.
The last.
Just before Idamma Vocha Bhagava Attamana.
There's also the Pono Bhavika in the description of the second noble truth. Yayang Tanha Pono Bhavika, always looking for a new birth. I believe that's how you would translate it. Pono Bhavika. It is desire which gives rise to fresh birth. Yayang Tanha Pono Bhavika. Punabhavoti. Natidani punapavoti idamavocha. Oh yeah, and it's right also here. Natidani punapavoti, it's right at the end of this very passage. There is no further becoming. So there you go. Ajahn Sucitto, for once, it's not 100% correct, I would humbly say. But the point he's making about jati is very valid, because it's trying to go against the current of view about reincarnation, and what is really meant, or how you can sort of specify or define what punabhava means, what we'll come to shortly. In a karmic field of interdependence, no thing is really born, but through the coming together of the five khandhas is the appearance of a unified and separately existent self. The continuing factor of birth after birth, then, is not the elements, but what brings them together, what holds and merges energies, elements, and forces into apparent independent units. It is that which serves as the continuum for further becoming, there you go, upon which birth is dependent. Obviously, desire, the inclination towards separative existence, bhava tanha, plays a key part, as does attachment, upadana, while ignorance bars the insight into interdependence. There's also an interesting little sutta. There's this wanderer called Vacchagotta who frequently came to visit the Buddha and asked him questions. And at one time Vacchagotta asked the Buddha, what is it that sustains consciousness, or what is it that sustains that impulse for rebirth when one life comes to an end and before the next life begins? And the Buddha said, just like in a forest fire, when a flame leaps from one tree to another, the flame is sustained by the air. That's its fuel is the air. So it seemed like the Buddha understood how oxygen worked. He said, in the same way, what sustains that existence from the end of one life and to the beginning of another is tanupadana. So it's a combination of tanha and upadana. He makes a single compound word. So you can call that craving and clinging, or the attachment to craving, or in some way of those two are brought together. And also it's interesting that upadana means fuel as well as clinging. So it's literally, you could say, the fuel is craving, tanupadana, or you could say that what sustains it is craving and clinging. So that the word upadana, it's not just two different words spelt the same way, the fuel and clinging, but it's the same precise word. So that's an interesting little sutta in this respect. When we examine the experience of life with insight, we might see that the coming together, quote unquote, is experienced in a moment after moment fashion as the codependent arising of consciousness and name and form. Now, rupa, form, and vedana, feeling, plus sanya, perception, plus sankhara, plus vijnana, consciousness. That is the potential to receive impressions through the senses based on the psychophysical organism. In this way, when we see something, it can be noted as a moment of visual consciousness arising dependent on the eye organ and contact. A feeling and a mental perception arise, which is mind consciousness arising as the mind receives the eye's message. With the perception arises the mental formation, the thought of the visual object. Then, dependent on interest and desire and the lingering of attention or attachment, a whole range of perceptions and feelings proliferate, compounded out of associations, memories, inclinations. In brief, attachments. And this experience gives rise to the impression of a separate self who sees and thinks. And then he quotes the Madhupindika Sutta. That's the Sutta number 18 in the Majjhima Nikaya. That's the one that's mostly about conceptual proliferation, about papancha. Madhupindika. Madhu means honey, or something that's sweet. Pindika means a piece of food, or a morsel, or a lump. You could call it the sweet nugget sutta, Madhupindika. And it's given that name not because it's about eating sweets, but particularly at the end of it, when Venerable Ananda is talking with the Buddha about this teaching, he says, "This is amazing, this is wonderful, this is delightful, this is like a beautiful, sweet, delicious morsel of food. This is like a sweet nugget of the most delicious taste. What shall we call this teaching, Venerable Sir? We can call it the Sweet Nugget Sutta, Madhu Pindika Sutta." So that's what it's been known as ever since. So visual consciousness arises because of eye and material shapes. The meeting of the three is sensory impingement. Because of sensory impingement arises feeling. What one feels, one perceives. What one perceives, one reasons about. What one reasons about, one proliferates over. What one proliferates over becomes the source of the array of perceptions and obsessive thoughts that assail one in regards to visual objects and of the past, future, and present. So that's another way of describing that. So that there's a sense impression, and then the sanya or perception is like after the contact. Then say the eye receives the light, sends the message to the brain. The brain perceives the object before there is a thought. So that the brain perceives the dark red color of the back wall. It sees that color, and then the thought, vitakka, comes after the perception. So the perception is just the way that's formed in consciousness, and then the vitakka, the thinking, comes in after and says red, and there also might be just a comment about that, like I like that red or I don't like that red, but it's a simple conceptual thought that describes what the mind has designated in terms of perception. And then papancha is a conceptual proliferation. It's like, oh, that's right, we just repainted that a year and a half ago. It was during the rains. It was during the winter retreat. That's right. And Ray the Spray, he came and, oh yeah, Ray died a couple of weeks ago, and it was. This is papancha, the mind taking a particular thought and then running off in different directions with it. And then as papancha accelerates and expands, the more that it does, then the more there becomes a sense of me here perceiving the world out there, or me here thinking of a memory or of a plan, and that is an increase of a sense of separation between the subject and the object, me and the world. And so another term for that, say what he calls the source of the array of perceptions and obsessive thoughts that assail one in regard to visual objects of the past, present, and future. So a way of just saying that briefly is to call it pressurized alienation, a sense of me here, the world out there, and a sort of pressured sense of I existing in a separate relationship to that, either afraid of that, or wanting that, or disliking that, or having an opinion about that, and making that because of that sort of the depth of attachment and being lost in that train of thought, then it feeds that sense of me alone in the world, or me separate from a world out there. Using the references of dependent origination, it is the proliferating power of ignorance affecting the karma productive activities, sankhara, in mental consciousness, avijja paccaya sankhara, sankhara paccaya vijnana. That is the condition for birth. This can also be expressed as the activity of the outflows, the asava. The accumulative effect of the vipaka of this affects the karmic field in which consciousness continually arises. The more that the mind is allowed to dwell and be activated in ignorance, the more the patterns are established on ignorance, and the accompanying desire and attachment get established where the consciousness arises. The net result is that the consciousness keeps getting re-established in the same old patterns. To this extent, there is rebirth. Nothing is really reborn, but a pattern persists, a kind of karmic blueprint or genetic code upon which consciousness and name and form get established. So, and a very, very brief way that Luang Por Sumedho would express that same principle is to say, as his translation of avijja paccaya sankhara is, ignorance complicates everything. So that's an easy, sort of succinct way of getting the mind around that principle. There's also a very beautiful teaching by the sixth Zen patriarch, Great Master Huineng, where he says, in this moment there is no thing that comes to be. In this moment there is no thing that ceases to be. Thus, in this moment there is no birth and death to be brought to an end. So it's the same principle that Ajahn Sucitto is talking about here. There's no thing that's really born. So sankhara is an easy way of translating sankhara is just as thing. So that to call something a thing is a shorthand of talking about a process. So we wouldn't say this is a clock, but rather there is clocking going on. This is not a table. There's some tabling happening. And so these just now, that we cut down these trees and that were in the garden. So what was once some apple trees and cherry trees and an ash and a beech, they are turning into building or firewood, or being ready to be carved into different reliquaries or whatever. But they were, this morning there was an apple tree. Now, and then there was a cherry tree. Now there are some very handsome wide planks. There's some sawdust. There's some empty space. So this was growing somewhere some time ago, probably maybe even in a few different places. But we put it together and we call it table. So we said, well, that table, of course, is a thing, but that's a shorthand for describing an ongoing process. And so that when what is meant by saying there's no thing really born, it's just that just as the great master Huineng said, no, there is no thing that comes to be. It looks that way. Or we say, oh, there's a child just got born, but that's a convenient fiction, like saying that the sun comes up in the morning, or this is a table. But as long as the mind believes that there really has been a thing that has begun, then there'll be dukkha, avijja paccaya sankhara. The more the mind takes that thingness to be real, then complication and dukkha rapidly happen. So the avijja is, in a sense, the ignorance is the mind ready to create the world of things, rather than seeing reality as it actually is. So then he quotes a passage from the Anguttara, Book of the Threes. In that way, Ananda, karma is like a field, consciousness like a seed, and desire like sap. For beings that are hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving, consciousness is established on a low level. So it is that further becoming and ongoing birth are brought about. Thus, Ananda is existence. To use a simile, if we apply a burning match to dry paper in the presence of air, a flame will arise on the paper. The flame has not left the match, nor has anything passed from the match to the paper. The second flame has arisen, bearing certain similar characteristics to the first, and related to the first through action, kamma, initiated by some volition or desire. The paper, form, is dry and has the potential for combustion, the arising of consciousness. What we have to remember is the essential presence of oxygen, becoming, which is the continuum of the transmission. Okay, could you follow that? I'll read it again. It's a great simile, but so to use a simile, if we apply a burning match to dry paper, strike a match, piece of paper. So the presence of air, in the presence of air, a flame will arise on the paper. The flame has not left the match, nor has anything passed from the match to the paper. The second flame has arisen, bearing certain similar characteristics to the first, the heat, for a start, and related to the first through action. If you don't bring the match to the paper won't light. Initiated by some volition or desire, so that the action of bringing the match to the paper is kamma. Then the paper is rupa, the form. If it's dry and the match comes to it, it has the potential for combustion. So that burning of the paper is what's symbolizing consciousness. And what we have to remember is the essential presence of oxygen, becoming, so that as long as there's oxygen there, then the paper will ignite. If there's no oxygen, the paper won't ignite. and the match will go out quickly, which is the continuum of the transmission. The pattern of birth is then established on desire, attachment, and ignorance. So the stickiness of consciousness is a result and a cause for the accumulative process of attachment and becoming that give rise to self-view. So I'll say it again. So the stickiness of consciousness, like the tendency of consciousness to be grasped at, is a result and a cause for the accumulated process of attachment and becoming that gives rise to self-view. So the habit of attaching to consciousness, like I think, I feel, I see red, I feel wood, that identification with consciousness, the believing in a thing as being solid and real, the sense of I am the experience of the doer, then that is calling the stickiness, in a way, the force of habit of identifying with things. So then he says, so although the process of birth is selfless, that glue that binds the khandhas together, the upadana or attachment, is nourished and gets developed by the results, the vipaka, of the karma or the action. Before the whole scenario gets too depressing and fatalistic, we should remember that the whole birth-becoming process only pertains to the field of karma. And as the Buddha says, there is the unborn. We can liken this to the space within which action and form occur. How can we know that? Simply because we can observe action and form, desire, attachment, and becoming. So, and this is a teaching that was very central to what Luang Por Chah learned from his teacher, from Luang Pu Man. And one of the sort of essential insights was that sense of the five khandhas is one thing, and that which knows the five khandhas is another. And because of that essential transcendent potency or quality of the awareness, that's why liberation from birth is possible. If the awareness was inseparable or was say intrinsically meshed and attached to the khandhas, then liberation would be impossible. So what he's saying here is that simply because we can observe action and form, desire, attachment, and becoming, and also the image of the island, it's that we use as that title for the book that Ajahn Pasno and I put together. That the island is called, the Buddha used the description, there is an island that you cannot go beyond. And you can use that image of the island that you can't go beyond is the quality of awareness itself. You can't get behind the awareness. That's that quality of pure awakened knowing. That's the back wall. It's an island. It's the vantage point that is inviolable, but you can't go beyond it. And just even having in a way, just using that term, that phrase, an island which you can't go beyond. It's like, well, hang on, if it's an island, it must be surrounded by water, so how come you can't go beyond it? So even in using that mixture of terms, he gets you thinking. But that's the image of it. It's the quality of awareness. It's an island. It's a secure place, but you can't go beyond it. You can't sort of get behind the awareness, because the awareness is the fundamental quality, fundamental agent of knowing. This must be the case in order for there to be a clear way to fully see desire, attachment, and becoming. In the Buddha's accounts of his own awakening, this complete review of the process of karma and birth was not a sign of being totally enmeshed in it, but rather of a mind that was transcending it. It must also be considered that the way out of karma is by cultivating enough good karma for consciousness to arise with requisite faculties for enlightenment. Good karma binds the sense of self in more sensitive, refined, loving and peaceful states. Bad karma does the reverse. Although both karmas are adhesive in essence, good karma will sensitize the mind until its reflective powers can see through the accumulated whirl of phenomena, and the appetite for further birth palls. And good karma feels good. It's good to feel free from remorse, clear and compassionate towards others. So a simple way of phrasing that is to say, when you When you act in a wholesome way, that helps the mind to be more peaceful and clear. When you act in an unwholesome way, it makes the mind more stressed and confused. So, and this is a theme also very, very common amongst Luang Por Chah's teachings, where he'd say, goodness is not good, it's just good in and of itself. The kusala kamma, wholesome action, is not good in and of itself, but goodness, we call it good because goodness provides the basis for being able to see clearly, being able to allow the mind to be fully attuned to its nature as Dhamma. And what we call unwholesome is not intrinsically bad. Like, badness isn't bad, it's just we call it bad because the more the mind follows the unwholesome, the more it creates alienation, confusion, stress, and feeds greed, hatred, and delusion, and therefore it makes it much harder to see things clearly. So in a way, it's almost physics, the way that it works. So that and also both Luang Por Chah and other teachers out of the forest tradition emphasize the importance of not attaching to goodness, because it's very, very common in Thai culture, as most Buddhist countries, creating good karma, you go and make merit, and really attaching to goodness and trying to accumulate good points and create good karma and keep it, store it up like some kind of spiritual bank account or insurance policy, and so that when you read the teachings of Ajahn Amaro, Ajahn Chah, they're stressing, don't attach to goodness, don't attach to happiness, because it'll whip round and bite you, just as if you'd taken hold of the head of the snake, you take hold of the tail of the snake. It's like attaching to happiness is just that way, that there aren't teeth in the tail end, but very quickly it'll whip around and bite you. Anyway, so attaching to goodness will end up causing suffering as well. So then he quotes a passage. Karma performed without greed, hatred and delusion is skillful, praiseworthy. That karma has happiness as its fruit. That karma leads to the cessation, to the ceasing of karma. So that's and that phrase, karma that leads to the end of karma, is a title of one of Ajahn Sucitto's books, Karma and the Ending of Karma, I think it's called. Although the spirit of selflessness is not measured in terms of some mental feeling, we have already seen that Buddhas do have feelings. They feel the bliss of concentration, the pain of physical sickness. In the presence of Buddha wisdom, feelings are made light and non-obstructive. The process of cultivating good karma, which is inspiring and leads one on, is the subject matter that is illustrated by the border of this painting. Although ultimately there is no rebirth, there is further becoming. That's the punabhava, as we were talking about. The process of karma vipaka, action and its result, stimulating the arising of beings in the plane of time, birth and death. Some of these beings are depicted in the border. The Buddha, in describing his own awakening, recounts seeing, during the first watch of the night, the stream of cause and effect that had led him to that point. His mind had become so clear that he was also able to see the stream of cause and effect extending into a great range of his past lives and that of a great number of other beings as well. In looking at his own circumstances, what stood out was the consistent perfection of good karma through paramita, spiritual acts that go beyond the normal motivation of personal gain. The 10 perfections, or paramita, are generosity, dana, morality, sila, renunciation, nekamma, wisdom, panya, energy, virya, patient endurance, khanti, truthfulness, satya, resolution, adhitthana, benevolence, metta, and equanimity, upekkha. The story goes that the recollections of this wealth of goodness was one of the foundations for repelling the host of Mara. Fully knowing his aspiration and inner worth, the Bodhisattva was able to stave off any doubts that might assail him as to his intention and resolve. This presentation of the value of good karma is very helpful. It indicates that the mind can be weaned from sensory gratification, becoming an ignorance. As the Buddha's teachings grew more popular, the practice of perfecting karma was illustrated by means of hundreds of fables called jatakas about the previous lives of the great being. In each of his previous lives, whether he was a monkey or a Brahmin, a prince or a hermit, he perfected one of the 10 paramita. Also, to backtrack a little bit, another of the interesting, useful suttas or similes that the Buddha used when somebody asked him that question about what is it that's reborn, or are we the same person, or are we the same being as we were in a previous life, or are we different? And the Buddha answers, well, you can't say that it's entirely different, you can't say that it's entirely the same. Both of those statements are inaccurate. And then he gives this very good illustration. He says to the person, I forget the name of the person he was talking to, but he said, say you don't have to even think about it in terms of this life and other lives, but if you think back, or if you consider yourself at the age of one, if you are like a 1-year-old baby, a little infant, can you say that you are now, as an adult, the same as that infant? You say, well, the infant was one thing, and I'm another, but I couldn't have got to be the way I am if I hadn't been that infant. And so they're not entirely separate, but then definitely they're not the same. And the Buddha said that's exactly how it is, because without the infant having been there, there couldn't be the causes and conditions that bring you to the state of being an adult. But you're certainly not the same as you were as an infant. So there's a chain of cause and effect that bring the conditions together that we sort of say the result in this person, but it's more like a sequence of causes and effects, like a wave running in from the sea into the shore, as another image that I often give. It looks like it's the same person. We can say, just see Anagarika Amen again. He's not, just because you're conveniently present. So he's not the same as he was when he was a baby, but he's not entirely different, and that there's a connection. But all of the things that happened during Eamon's life have now arrived at this particular configuration, and so, but along the way, there's a whole incalculably complex chain of causes and effects that bring it to a life to this particular shape at this moment. So the image of a wave coming in from the sea, that it looks like there's this single sort of lump of water, this ridge that starts out a couple of 100 yards, 300 yards out into the water, and you see this ridge moving from out at sea and then coming towards the shore, and then the wave breaking on the shore. And it looks like a lump of water that's moving towards you as you stand on the shore and see it coming at you. And so that you can say, oh, Eamon was a little baby. He was born... Where was he born?
66.
In 1966, where was that?
London.
In London. So born 1966 in London, still a youngster. So you can say, well, that, and then you can say, well, now he's the same person, same social security number, same birthday, and same family, and so forth. But along the way, all those changes have taken place. So there's a connection, but what's here is not the same as what was there in 1966 in London. So when if you know the physics of how waves work, it looks like a single ridge of water starting out 200 or 300 yards out to the sea and coming in, but it's not actually the single lump of water molecules moving into the shore. The actual movement of the water molecules is more in like a circular or an oval shape. And it's the energy that moves through the water that creates the appearance of a single lump. But the water is actually just going kind of up and down. The actual molecules of water are not moving from 200 yards out in and hitting the shore, but the energy moves through them and raises the water up, bit by bit by bit by bit, and then eventually the wave breaks on the shore. So that's pretty much what our life is. It looks like there's a birth as the water raises up 200 or 300 yards out, and then it forms into a wave. The wave gets bigger, comes into the shore, say birth and death. And it looks like the wave began over there and it ended here. But along the way, all this the molecules that make up our body and all the other aspects of our life are it's not like one thing that's going from its source to its end. but it's a whole massive sequence of causes and conditions, causes and effects that are touching each other and conditioning each other until the wave breaks on the shore. So that when you use a term like rebirth, then it's referring to that process. So even though Ajahn Sucitto does say he uses he says there is no rebirth, but there is further becoming. But to me, that's a little bit confusing, because mostly when people are using the word rebirth in Buddhist terminology, if they're using it correctly, then they're referring to that again becoming, that sort of wave-like process of cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect, rather than the idea of a single entity being transmigrating, going from one place, like a bubble of Atman going from one body to another. So we can have a little conversation about that. But I'll read you this little story first of all, and it's one of the Jatakas on the development of patience. And Ajahn Sucitto has an extra little illustration here. There's a hand with kind of a muscular arm with a very large, wide-bladed sword, and a cave, and a few people sitting there on the edges of the cave. For instance, in one life, the great being was a hermit who lived in a cave, practicing patient endurance. At that time, the king of that country liked to go out in the countryside, enjoying himself, hunting and drinking and eating, as is the way of kings. Generally, he took his 150 wives along with him. Nice, a jolly picnic out in the park and in the forest. He probably expected them to coo in awe when he came back with a dead stag. Anyway, they were out together one day, and the king decided to go off and chase some deer, leaving his wives with the servants and the baggage in a nice picnic spot. After a while, the ladies got bored and decided to go and pick some flowers and look at the scenery. Well, they came across the hermit sitting in his cave, radiating gentleness and serenity. These ladies were intelligent and cultivated, and they were moved to respectfully inquire as to what his practice of Dhamma was. So he told them that he was practicing patience. They, having had to put up with the behavior of the king for so many years, could easily relate to the practice of patience, and were very uplifted to realize that being patient with life was spiritually strengthening. This event set them thinking. Meanwhile, the king came back from the hunt, hot and tired, and expecting to be received by his adoring wives and told how magnificent he was. Nobody was there, but a few servants looking after the baggage. "Humph!" snorted the king. And when the servants told him that his wives had gone for a walk, he stomped off in the direction in which they had gone. Coming to the hermit's cave, he found all of his wives engaged in rapt conversation about patient endurance with a little man in a loincloth. The king's instincts and ways of assessing situations were pretty basic. Out came his sword. As is the way of kings, you know. Sword first, question after. "Practicing patient endurance, are you? Let's see what you make of this." And with 2 swishes of his sword, he sliced off the great being's ears. The hermit remained unmoved in body and mind. "Oh yeah?" roared his majesty, and sliced off the great being's nose. Still the hermit kept cool. Off came the arms and legs, as the king tried to shake the hermit's resolve, but to no avail. The king perhaps started to consider that there was something unusual about this hermit, or maybe he was getting tired. Anyway, he asked the great being why he was doing this practice. "Your Majesty," or "Your Majesty," replied the sage, "I wish to become a Buddha and discover a Dhamma for the welfare of all beings. In this lifetime I have resolved to develop the paramita of patient endurance towards that aim. As you have helped me to perfect that quality today, when I do attain to complete awakening in a future life, you will be the first one to whom I will transmit my Dhamma. Now, if what I am saying has any truth in it, may my arms and legs and severed members be joined back to my body." In a moment his body was restored to its former appearance. The king, it is said, dropped his sword and prostrated on the ground in a gesture of humility and respect, and probably intense fear. And many lifetimes later, he was born as Kondanya. Thus the story goes. So Anya Kondanya had managed to work off some heavy karma. So anyway, I'll leave it there for today on that delightful story, and open things up for any questions or need for clarification. Yes?
I'd like to know the difference between mindfulness and awareness. Awareness, mindfulness. No, I don't really.
That's a good question. Well, the word mindfulness is used to refer to quite a lot of different things. And usually when the term mindfulness is employed, it's generally in a Buddhist context, it's a shorthand way of saying mindfulness and wisdom, satipanya, or mindfulness and clear comprehension, sati sampajanya. Technically, on its own, the word sati, it just means to recollect or to remember. So, as Luang Por Sumedho would often say, a squirrel has to have a lot of sati when it's jumping through the branches of a tree. Or if you watch the cats hunting for a mouse, you see a cat hunting for a mouse. The cat has a lot of sati. It's concentrating really hard, focusing completely on the movement in the grass, looking for the mouse. So that sati on its own is a very basic mechanical function. It doesn't have a reflective element in it at all. So you could be a mindful sniper. And oftentimes when in the modern mindfulness movement, which is very, very popular, they're really just talking about that kind of a sati, so paying attention in the present moment. And so you can have a mindful bank robber or a mindful sniper in that respect. That's not a misuse of the term. Like you can have a mindful cat or a mindful squirrel. It's what they call amoral, A-M-O-R-A-L, so non-moral. It hasn't got a moral element to it. So then the next level, so that's just paying attention in the present moment to a particular object or experience or feeling. So sati sampajanya, sampajanya means clear comprehension or clear awareness. And so that means mindfulness of an object, but also being aware of the context. So like, I'm not just mindful of your question, I'm also aware of what I've said already, the fact that it's 10 to 6, we've got about another 10 minutes or so to play with, sense of are people paying attention, am I making sense, are things being understood, or is this useful? So it's not just the object, but the whole field of what's going on. So it's the awareness of the object and the surroundings, the context as well. So that's sati sampajanya. So that also then has, that's where the moral element comes in. So then the awareness of, oh well, I'm robbing a bank, I'm paying attention to it, but I'm also feeling afraid because I might get caught, and then there's going to be all kinds of painful consequences that come from that. And even after I've robbed the bank, then last time I did this, I spent 5 years in jail. So do I really want to do this again? So it's that there's a reflective element, and also seeing cause and effect in the interrelationship of things. So that sense of if you do things that are wholesome, then it brings a pleasant result. If you do things that are unwholesome, then there's going to be painful results. So that's mindfulness and clear awareness. And when Luang Por Sumedho's using the term intuitive awareness, that's his translation for sati sampajanya. So it's like an awareness that's tied into your own feeling for the way everything fits together, and the relationship of all that's there in what you're perceiving, thinking and feeling. So then the third level is satipanya, or mindfulness conjoined with wisdom. So that's a whole extra layer that is not just aware of the object in its context, but also is aware of in a way the the process of experiencing. So, like I can say, I'm aware that it's now 8 minutes to 6, and I said a few points already, and I'm now going on to the satipanya bit. I can be aware of that, but also the satipanya element is recognizing here is sound. This is sound is an aspect of mind consciousness. There's a hearing consciousness happening. There's seeing is happening in the mind. The experience of the sala is happening in my consciousness. I close my eyes, you disappear. I open my eyes, you reappear. This is a mental event. I don't see you, I see my mind's representation of you. Like I haven't got my glasses on at the moment, so your eyes are just like two black, blurry blobs that sort of merge together with your eyebrows. There's this sort of... your eyes aren't a lot different from your beard, because I haven't got my glasses on. If I had my glasses on, your eyes would not look just like your beard. But at the moment, they do. So that seeing that, this is what the mind puts together as a representation of this moment. So it's in a way seeing that the world is in your mind. And the process of insight meditation, vipassana, is essentially is developing that wisdom quality, so that it's not just knowing the time and the place and the situation, but also knowing, all that arises passes away. This is seeing, hearing, feeling, smelling, tasting, touching. These are just patterns of consciousness that are in a constant state of fluid change. So it's in a way seeing the phenomena of experience, and directly knowing the quality of experiencing itself. And an easy way to put these together that Luang Por Chah would use is to say the sati is like the hand, the thing that picks something up. It's just the thing that takes hold of an object. Sampajanya is like the arm that you need to get the hand to go where it needs to go, and panya, the wisdom, is the body that is the activating, the life source for the whole thing. Without a body, an arm and a hand aren't much use. And so it's the wisdom that really connects is in a way the source and the basic ground for those other aspects. So that's so when you hear the word mindfulness, you have to, in a sense, consider how's that person using it. Are they just using it to mean paying attention, or are they using it to mean a real transcendent awareness? Like I was saying, that the island which is, that you cannot go beyond. That's the satipanya. That's the back wall of experiencing. You can't get behind that. It's not just cognizing what's going on in the moment, or like, okay, I hear sound. That's not liberating. So in that verse from the Dhammapada that Luang Por Sumedho liked to quote, mindfulness is the path to the deathless, heedlessness is the path to death. The mindful never die, the heedless are as if dead already. So that word that is translated as mindfulness, that one is appamada. And that, like appamado from Portugal. So appamada is the same as satipanya. It's like that real most profound and transcendent quality of awakened awareness. So it's, in a way, and they also use the English word heedfulness. Heedfulness is the path to the deathless. So if there is that satipanya, then that's the quality of awareness that knows things being born and dying. It's not tied to them at all.
Thank you.
It's all been recorded, so if you didn't catch all of that, you can listen to it again.
Ajahn, you spoke earlier about a flame moving from one object to another.
Mm-hmm.
Could this be a fuel to, say, like clinging?
Yeah, well, that's that. When people say, well, if a person isn't reborn, if a person isn't reborn, what is it that's reborn? I often just say habits. Habits are what's reborn. So that the Buddha said, like, it's tanupadana, like craving is the fuel. Mm-hmm. I would say force of habit.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So could this be rebirth?
well, that's the fuel. That is, as you said, that's what sustains, or that's what the consciousness feeds on between one birth and the next. Is in that, you can say, just force of habit. There's a very, very wonderful little book. We have a copy in the library, I believe. It's called "The Mountains of Tibet." It's an unusual. It's a kid's book. It's like a little, very thoroughly illustrated children's book, and it starts off. Once upon a time, there was a little boy who lived in Tibet, whose name was Tenzin, and he used to like to run on the mountainside and fly his kite. A little colourful picture of a kid with his boots and his kite and the sky and the mountains. And so you think, okay, we're just going to get into the story now. You turn over the page, and then the next page says, Tenzin became an old man and he died. Okay, that's page 2 of the story. Okay, well, that was quick. But it's a book to teach about this whole process. So then you see this fellow sort of lying on the bed, and then this sort of consciousness disappearing out of his head. And as Tenzin passed away, then his consciousness left the body, and then very, very rapidly the consciousness then was faced with this great vast openness, this brightness, and a voice appeared that said, do you want to dissolve into the unspeakable, to the beyond, or would you like to be born again? What would you like to do? Do you want to dissolve into the clear light of awareness, or would you like to be born somewhere? He goes, Not sure. I'm not remembering this absolutely 100% correctly. You can find the book and read it. But actually, I can bring it along. I have a copy of my own. Not sure. Well, I kind of. I really enjoyed I enjoyed that life thing. I can't remember much of it, but I think I would like to carry on somewhere, somehow. And then this next picture is a whole Milky Way. So what? Here we are. Here is the universe. What would you like? Where would you like to be? So, well, that's kind of beautiful. That sort of big spirally, milky-coloured thing, and it's sort of about of course 3/4 of the way out. That looks like a nice spot. And oh look, and there's this kind of big, bright yellow thing, and these little dots around it. And so which one of those? Any of those look interesting to you? Well, that third one out with the blue and the green colour. There's the red one that's before it, and this kind of cloudy one after it. But that blue and green one, I kind of like the look of that. Okay, so then it gravitates down to the world and says, so there's many different possibilities. There's hot places and cold places and low places and dark places and wet places and dry places and green places and sandy places. What sort of place there looks interesting to you? And there's there's a lot of different things that are really kind of beautiful. Well, that lumpy place with the white bits, that looks kind of nice. I'd like to have a look over there. And then you sort of turn the page, and it says, once upon a time, a little girl called Dhamma used to like to play on the mountainside and fly her kite. So it's not even things that we necessarily that we like or that we dislike that conditions rebirth, becomes the fuel, but it's familiarity. Just things that are familiar, that there's no sort of conscious love or hate, but just what's the flavors, the tastes that the mind's conditioned to. So just as that gravitation, so that clinging, that a sense of I am this is mine, I like this, I want this is who I am. That kind of clinging. So it doesn't have to be anything sort of gross or excessive. It can just be that. Oh yeah, that feels good. Just like when you smell something that was a food that you used to have when you were a child, or a particular flower that grew in the garden, you just have a smell of it, and you go, oh, something just feels gravitation to it. Oh yeah, that's good. I like that taste, that smell, and you feel comfortable with it. You'd like it, but there's no real necessarily, not even a real consciousness that, oh, I like that smell of that flower. It's just takes me back, even if back was not all good. At least it was familiar. So continuing with the chapter called Unshakeable Freedom. So we just last time finished the story of the king of Kalinga, been helping the Bodhisattva to develop the quality of patience, and who it is said, according to some accounts, was Anya Kondanya, the Buddha's first disciple who entered stream entry in a later appearance. Another good example of a transcendent virtue is equanimity, upekkha. In one Jataka, the great being decided to perfect this paramita. He lived as an ascetic, sitting out in the blazing sun all day and going naked in the chill of the night, sleeping on thorns and rocks, drinking water from puddles and eating leaves. All this was intended to develop equanimity. He did this for 80 years, constantly testing the body in order to become equanimous to pain and discomfort. However, as asceticism is a negation of the body and inflicts unnecessary hardship, it leads to a rebirth in hell. So when the ascetic died, he went straight to hell. As he saw the gates of hell loom up ahead of him, he thought, that life was a complete waste of time. Oh well, never mind. And at that moment he perfected equanimity and immediately went up to the heavenly realms. This is where snakes and ladders comes from. You realise it's an Indian game. So down the long snake, and then whoop, next thing you know, up the tallest ladder. Such stories give you another perspective when your boss is hollering at you for something that wasn't finished yesterday. It helps you to remember what you can get right, what you can take with you, and where your real home is. To remember that feels good and gives you strength when times are hard. To remember that feels good and gives you strength when times are hard. When the reflections on insight, cessation, and nibbana lose their appeal, having such a fable in mind helps one find the aspiration to keep going in the face of the stuff that life brings up. And the results are good. Life can give you spiritual strength and a sense of purpose if its mundane routines are highlighted in this way. For example, to be patient, generous, kind, moral, and wise are qualities to perfect. Any action that brings these perfections into the world has the capacity to awaken the transcendent side of the mind. When you rise to the occasion, the result is that you feel good in yourself. And maybe a couple of stories also to tell around this, where people who are on the basic principle of, and this is a theme I bring up over and over again. I can't imagine how many Dhamma talks and expositions, but it's the simple principle that when we think of something as being good or a success, think, oh, this is great, fantastic, I got what I wanted, and then a few years later we realise, I can't believe I was celebrating. That ended up being the worst thing that ever happened to me. Getting that job, getting married to that person, divorcing that person, and coming into the monastery, leaving the monastery, and you think, oh, fantastic, at last I got what I wanted, this is great. And then 5 years later, 10 years later, you're rolling your eyes, going, I can't believe I was celebrating. What an idiot. And similarly, when things fall apart and things are really difficult, you get some kind of horrible illness, or you get all your money ripped off, or you get fired from that job, or you come back home and your partner has disappeared and taken all the money. And at the time, it's a disaster, it's a crisis, it's awful, it's the worst. But then, how many times, 5 or 10 years later, we realize, well, I would never ever have asked for that to happen, but actually that was really wonderful. That was the best thing that ever happened to me. Yeah. The brother of one of the former monks of this community, Ajahn Sucitto, his brother got AIDS in the very early period of its say existence in the world, in the human world, in the 80s, and that was a comment that his brother made as he was dying. That he said, you think it sounds crazy, but getting AIDS is the best thing that's ever happened to me, and he died of it. He died, but it was a genuine and clear insight that he regarded that his life was very foolish and shallow and messed up. And even though it was a short period of time, he learned a lot from that, the early death and the illness that came. Similarly, you have this these kind of beliefs. It's quite common in the Buddhist world that the idea that what you're thinking of at the last moment is what matters, and that is going to guarantee the destination after you're reborn. And there are many stories like that. Or we might think that somehow some kind of life that's been very, very unskillful is necessarily going to take you down to the hell realms. But none of these things are guaranteed. So there's a couple of stories from the Buddha's lifetime. One is this is a very popular story around people who like to drink, because it's called Sarakani, who to drink. And there was this disciple of the Buddha in Kapilavatthu called Sarakani, who was a notorious drunk. They didn't have alcoholics in those days, just people who drank a lot. So Sarakani was a notorious drunk around Kapilavatthu, but he did have great faith in the Buddha and in the Triple Gem. And when one day when Sarakani passed away, as people would often do, they'd go and see the Buddha. He was staying in Kapilavatthu at the time, and said, "So what's happened to Sarakani? Where's he gone?" Because occasionally the Buddha would say, "Oh, such and such a being has gravitated to this realm or that realm," and they're all expecting him to be going to be reborn as a dog or as a maggot in a vineyard or something. And the Buddha, to their amazement, says, "Oh, if Sarakani was a stream enterer, he's been reborn in a bright realm." Like, what? He was a stream enterer, but he was a drunk. And the Buddha said, "Yes, he was." But he also had, even though he was a drunk, he had great faith in the Triple Gem, and at the time of his death, then his mind was able to experience the benefits of the faith that he had, and that ripened in stream entry. So that's what happened. And they said, then the rumor goes around Kapilavatthu. This is incredible. Anybody can be a stream enterer these days. The price has really dropped. And so then this whole, the rumor mill and the version of Twitter, kind of the Buddha era version of Twitter, goes twittering around Kapilavatthu, and the stories come back. Everyone's sort of upset and amazed, and how can the Buddha possibly say this? This can't be true. And then he talks about different qualifications for stream entry, and he goes through sort of more and more sort of simple examples. And he said, even if these sala trees here were able to understand what is good and what is not good, what is wholesome, what is unwholesome, I would say that even these trees are stream enterers, because really that's what it takes, that in the heart that recognize this is good. And so he really drives a point home, and it gives a very interesting reflection on stream entry. So it's not always just defined in terms of the say breaking through self-view and doubt and attachment to rules and precepts and conventions, But the quality of faith, a sense of unwavering faith in the Triple Gem, is also in a way of categorizing it, and also that sense of that in the heart which can understand what's good, even if you can't do the good all the time. you know what the good is, and you know what the harmful is. Another similar story, which is more commentarial, is of the story of the state executioner called Tambadatika, which means copper teeth, and he'd been a bandit, and he and his gang were killed at one time, and then I think the story went that after they were captured, he killed all the other members of the gang while they were locked up, and so he was the only one left alive. And so they thought, well, this guy's obviously got no morals and no heart. He'd be a good executioner. So they spared him, and he became the state executioner for about 40 years. And then, and he got into his 60s. His arm was no longer strong enough to be able to kill his victims with a single blow. So he got retired. And then, as a retired executioner, he started to get interested in spiritual things, and he invited Venerable Sariputta to come to his house and have a meal. And then Sariputta came along, he offered the meal, and then shortly afterwards Tambadatika died. And so then they went to the Buddha and said, well, what happened to Tambadatika? He was the state executioner, he cut the heads off hundreds and hundreds of people over the years. And the Buddha said, oh, he's gone to a very, very fine destination. He's gone up to I don't think he was a stream enterer. I think Tambadatika just got reborn in the Tavatimsa heaven. They said, Tavatimsa heaven? But he was like covered in scars, and all his teeth had been smashed out, so he had these copper teeth. And he was the most sort of gruesome and violent character. And the Buddha said, well, yes, he created a lot of bad karma, but at the end of his life, then that was he had just heard a Dhamma talk from Venerable Sariputta, and there was sufficient good karma to make him be able to understand that, and his mind was in a bright state. And then he got killed by a runaway cow, knocking him down, and was reborn in the Tavatimsa heaven. So sometimes you get a lucky break. The odds are in that favour. And the last story I often tell in respect to this, because it's more of a Buddhist myth that everything depends on the last thought. And like in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, it makes a big emphasis on that, and in the commentarial literature of the Theravada, it makes a big thing about that what the mind is focusing on in the last moment makes all the difference. But there's another story, again in Kapilavatthu, and this is a relative of the Buddha called Mahanama, was the ruler of the Sakyans at that time. And he went to the Buddha and said, I'm really worried because I'm the ruler, I'm the Raja here, and my mind is always filled with these worries, all the affairs of state and the protecting the kingdom and the finances and the attacks from the borders and taxing people, and my head is filled with thinking and worries, and I'm concerned that if I get knocked down in the street, or some accident happens, when I die, I'm going to have my head, filled with all this list of sort of kingly nonsense, and so I'm worried that I'm going to die in a bad state. And then the Buddha said, well, don't be afraid, Mahanama, don't be afraid, because for many, many years you create a lot of good karma, and even though that your thoughts might be dwelling on worldly and insignificant matters, that when you die, because of the faith that's established, you will rise to distinction. And he gives this very beautiful analogy. He said, if you imagine taking an earthenware pot, like a little clay pot that's filled with ghee, like with fine oil, and you take that clay pot and you submerge it in some water, then you break the pot, then what will happen? So Mahanama said, well, if you have a pot full of ghee and you put it in water and you break it, then the shards of pottery, the broken bits of earthenware, will sink to the bottom, and the oil will rise up. And the Buddha said, exactly so, because your heart has been established in faith in the Triple Gem for so many years, then just as the body breaks and the elements, the earth element returns to the earth and so forth, your mind will rise up. Your mind will rise to distinction. So don't be afraid, Mahanama. Don't be afraid. So that's a reassurance in case you're worried about not having a clear mind at the last moment. That it's more benefit is to be found in how we live, and the quality of faith and understanding is really central to that. So, life can give you spiritual strength and a sense of purpose if its mundane routines are highlighted in this way. For example, to be patient, generous, kind, moral and wise are qualities to perfect. Any action that brings these perfections into the world has the capacity to awaken the transcendent side of the mind. When you rise to the occasion, the result is that you feel good in yourself. In the first watch of the night, when Buddhas awaken to some aspects of transcendent truth, they realize their true lineage. It's a spiritual lineage, an evolution of wisdom and purity. It gives them the foundation from which to view the khandhas, the outflows, and the host of Mara as not self. That foundation is not a personal position or an identity. It's a transcending position, established not on any personal quality, but on qualities that we can all develop and that take us out of our personal concerns and limitations. Being patient is definitely not self. It does not appeal to the outflows or the self-view. To them, it seems like a waste of time and even a humiliation. The transcendent, supramundane path is always a giving up of self. Yet giving up self becomes a far more stable and unshakable foundation than anything that comes through the processes of gaining and becoming. A couple of things to say about that. So this term, they realize their true lineage. So one of the other terms that describes stream entry, or the irreversible guarantee of enlightenment, is the change of lineage, or gotrabu, that the change of lineage consciousness, so that when the mind lets go of its attachment to the body and the personality, when there's a recognition the body is not self, the personality is not self, then that says something fairly radical about your family. If the body is not self, then what does that say about mum and dad, and our grandparents and great-grandparents, and so on and so forth? So the term change of lineage is to do with letting go of that identification with the body and the personality and our biological ancestry. And instead it's saying your real lineage is the Dhamma, not just Mr. and Mrs. Horner from the Weald of Kent. That is a very direct way of considering and reflecting on how we think of what we are. And so that seeing through self-view, that dropping of identification with the I am the body, I am the personality, this is me, this is who I and what I am, to see that those are convenient fictions rather than absolute realities, is to change the lineage. If you grasp that wrongly, of course, that causes a lot of problems. Like I remember being very enthusiastic about the Anatta teachings, and I made the very grave mistake of putting in an aerogram to my mother, you're not really my mother. Not really, which didn't go down very well, since she nearly died giving birth to me. And so I got a very blunt reply to that one, not surprisingly, because it was a stupid kind of a grasping of the idea, and also not something you put in an aerogram to your mother when you're 21 years old on the other side of the world in a war zone. So at that time, there was both Laos and Cambodia Cambodia was occupied by the Khmer Rouge at that time, and the Vietnamese were just invading, and Laos had been taken over by the Pathet Lao Communist Party, and Ubon is right where Thailand meets with Laos and Cambodia, you could hear the big guns going all the time, across the river. So it was not the kind of thing to say to your mother. So we live and learn. But that's a very useful way of, say, exploring the principle of self-view, and to just ask yourself that question. If the body is not self, then what does that say about my ancestry or where I come from? What's the lineage? If the body is not who and what I am, if my biological parents are the origin of this body, then what does this letting go of identification say about that? And it's a good way, a very effective way for some people to be able to sort of disrupt that habitual way of seeing things and to reconfigure the perceptions. Then about patience. Now the English word patience, like many of these Pali terms, that the word patience has connotations to it that don't really match the quality of the paramita of khanti. Because in English, the word patience, there's a kind of frustration. It means you're gritting your teeth and you've got the strength to wait for it all to be over. But it implies an undercurrent of resentment. I don't want to bother with this. I don't like it, but I can grit my teeth, and it'll be over at some point, and I've got the oomph to be able to endure it. So that's not the paramita of patience, of khanti, but rather the patience that is talked about in khanti, and what that embodies, it's a complete letting go of time. There's no future. So true patience is not waiting. So the English word implies waiting and a looking forward to this unwanted thing to be over. But the paramita of khanti is not that. There's no waiting. There's no time. There's a quality of surrender. There's the presence of an unpleasant experience, but the mind, what makes it a paramita, which means a method of carrying you across to the other shore. What is the liberating quality is a letting go of time as well as a letting go of self, and so there is a being in the presence of something that's difficult or unwanted, but there's no resentment, there's no waiting, there's a complete letting go. And Luang Por Chah used he's the master of these little sort of dharmic one-liners that are very useful teachings to bear in mind. So he said, a samana, a religious seeker, is one who has no future. So to most of us, the worldly method of thinking, to say you've got no future, I mean, it's a punk anthem from the 1970s, I think. I forget whether it was the Damned or the Sex Pistols I think it was the Sex Pistols who sang No Future as a sort of punk anthem. But this is no future as in letting go of time. So to the worldly habits of thinking, no future is don't say that, because we feel shocked or intimidated or robbed, or that there's a deadening of the heart because of that. But if you reflect, why would Luang Por Chah say a samana is one who has no future? That if you're really giving yourself to the spiritual principle, then you don't have a future. You're not creating a me who's passing through time, but rather there's a complete letting go of time. And then there's obviously a mindful awareness as things unfold and choices get made, but it's not conceived in terms of me and my life and what I want to do, or what I'm dreading doing, or what I'm excited about over there. But Dhamma is sanditiko, apparent here and now, akaliko, timeless. So giving up self becomes a far more stable and unshakable foundation than anything that comes through the processes of gaining and becoming. So that letting go of time, letting go of self, is realized as the stable foundation, because that is in a way the realization of Dhamma itself. And Dhamma means that which upholds. That the root is dhur, which means to hold or to support. So Dhamma is that which upholds everything. Or as John Cage, the experimental composer, put it, he called it the nothing which supports everything. Or each something is a celebration of the nothing which supports it. That's the exact phrase he used. It's at the beginning of his book called Silence. Okay. It is said that in the second watch of that night, under the Bodhi tree, the Buddha came to understand the laws of cause and effect that determine the future of all beings. This deepened his compassion and understanding of not-self. In this picture, the illustration that we've been talking about with the large, intricate border of many little faces, animals and people of various kinds. In this picture, the Buddha is portrayed seated above a knotwork figure. The knotwork represents the links of cause and effect, of temporality, in which the Buddha is no longer operating. His perfection of good karma has led to the end of karma. He is depicted touching the ground, calling the earth to bear witness to his paramita. The hand is painted in some detail, whereas the face has no detail apart from a gentle smile. This represents the change of lineage, as I was mentioning, from the realm of personality, we normally identify with the face, to that of transcendent activity within the field of cause and effect, the cultivation of paramita. That hand reminds us that realization of truths only comes by getting in touch with fundamental things like our actual feelings and beliefs. We have to touch the earth, leave the illusions and hopes behind, and get in touch with how it really is now. We don't need to contact a special set of perceptions and feelings, but we must develop an unwavering contact with the ones that arise ordinarily. Thus, another meaning of a Tathagata is one who has come. A Buddha, having seen through cause and effect, willingly enters into it out of compassion for other beings, beings still held in the belief that they are the process of cause and effect. So this is a very important spiritual symbol. Again, it's one of these themes I talk about a lot, and that the Buddha touching the earth, as Ajahn Sucitto puts it very, very clearly and eloquently here, that this is the Buddha in terms of being an immanent presence. So Tathagata can have two meanings. Well, I have more than that, but it can either be rendered as thus come, or it can be rendered as thus gone. Tat agata or tata gata. Gata is from gacchami, like I go, to tata is suchness. So it can be tata gata, which means gone to suchness. Or it can be tat agata, come to suchness. So it symbolizes the quality of transcendence, of total disentanglement or letting go of all things, non-identification with all things. But it also represents that quality of immanence or suchness, or participation in all things. So that's why I like to use the term unentangled participating as a way of describing that quality of awakened awareness. Also, in the imagery of the enlightenment story that we have with Mara, it's significant in the tale that even though the Buddha has fully awakened, his heart is totally liberated, the armies of Mara are still gathered around. And so you can, there's different ways of interpreting it, but the way I like to reflect on it is that the subjective experience of liberation is complete in the Buddha. His heart is totally freed. But Mara's army won't retreat. It's still gathered around and it's still threatening, even though as they throw their weapons, the spears turn into beams of light and the rocks that they throw turn into flowers that rain down and so on and so forth. But so they can't harm the Buddha as is sitting under the Bodhi tree, but they won't retreat. And then why it's called the Earth Witness Mudra, and this Buddha image here, it's probably the most common of all Buddha images from everywhere, from Siberia and Japan in the north, all the way down to Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia. That Earth Witness Mudra is the most common for Buddha images. I would say it's one of the most common. And what it's representing is that the story that Mara is trying to fool the Buddha, saying you're a total fool. You can't claim that you could succeed as a householder. You walked out on your wife and child. You walked out on your responsibilities of the kingdom to be a yogi. Then you gave up being a yogi. You couldn't stand it to be an ascetic, so you started eating ordinary food, and you put on all this weight. You're like an ordinary person, and now you say that you're totally enlightened. What a joke! Who do you think you are? You're a fool. You're a failed husband. You're a failed yogi, and now you're claiming to be the Lord of the universe. That's ridiculous. Who do you think you are? He said, I'm actually the only one who can really claim lordship over the universe, and since I'm the king of the highest of the sensual heavens, and so I'm really the one who should claim the right to sit on the immovable spot. I should be regarded as the ruler of this realm. Isn't that so? And then he calls his army to be his witness. So the different accounts vary about the numbers, but hundreds of thousands of members of his army, and they all say, "Oh yes, indeed, Your Majesty, you are indeed the one." So he says, "See, look, these are my witnesses. Who have you got to call as your witness? You haven't got your wife. You haven't got your yogi friends. You're all alone. You've got nothing. Who's your witness? Come on, speak up." And so then that's when the Buddha reaches down and touches the earth with his right hand, and he calls the earth goddess, who's called Dharani, or Torani in Thai, but Dharani in the Pali Sanskrit, Dharani, and then she rises up and then she makes this declaration. None of this is actually in the Pali canon. This is also commentarial and later literature, but in these mythological tales, she says, "This is my true son, and he has done everything that is necessary to claim full and complete enlightenment. He has fulfilled all of the 10 perfections, and he is fully self-liberated, fully awakened, and he is the only one who has the right to claim rulership over this universe. And you, Mara, are defeated." And then she unwraps her hair, and then this huge flood of water appears from her plait, and then washes the army of Mara away. So you see these pictures of sort of elephants and demons and what are rolling around in the surf, flowing out of her hair, and then they all come back carrying gifts and flowers and asking for forgiveness. But that what that symbolizes, that touch, just as Ajahn Sucitto says here, it's a Buddha, having seen through cause and effect, willingly enters into it out of compassion for other beings. So that's the quality of participation. So it's only when, rather than trying to live in a subjective experience of the unconditioned, that also incorporates or sort of reaches out and fully embodies the conditioned as well. There's this quality of full, say, engagement and participation. There's no fear of the conditioned realm. There's no need to keep it away, because what could it harm, or what could the conditioned realm limit? Because all sankharas are not self; they're not who and what you are. So there's no need to keep them away. You can let them in. There's no need to try and abide in some sort of sterilized, unconditioned realm that doesn't want to bother with the grubby realm of convention and form and birth and death. There's no need to push it away, because how could it harm or limit or confine? So that gesture of reaching out and say receiving and attuning to the conditioned as well as the unconditioned, that's what defeats Mara. And so it's through that that quality of recognizing that we participate in this life. You can't just be spiritual. You have a body, it needs to breathe, it needs to eat. Yeah, you do have a biological family, you have a place where you need to live, buildings that you need shelter in. So we are participating. There is the karma of this birth. And if you try to sort of live off in some kind of abstracted spiritual dimension, sort of trying to identify with the unconditioned, then you're ignoring the conditioned, and then what happens is that you dismiss that, or you look down on it, or you say that it doesn't matter, it has no significance. Then pretty soon the snake whips around and bites you, and the conditioned realm comes back to knock on your door and say, well, actually, you owe £23,000 in back taxes. You might see that all dhammas are empty, but Her Majesty's Revenue Department is seeing things differently. And so that ignoring the needs of the body, ignoring your health concerns, ignoring your relationships with other people, or overlooking, or say, well, it's, everything's empty, it doesn't really matter, why bother? That most of us have probably had this kind of experience, that the world does come back to bite you and say, oh yeah, empty are we? Okay, try this one for size. And then we are then tested to see whether those particular difficult conditions are indeed as empty as our theorizing mind paints them as. Okay, to continue. All we can know is that we are, although the definition of what we are is subject to views and opinions. Is it possible to leave that suchness, that isness of being, unconditioned by our attempts to define it? Is it possible to abide in that apparent emptiness until we taste the freedom that enriches it? It is an act of trust, and the awakened ones can abide trusting in emptiness because of the rich store of paramita that has given them supreme confidence. With that, they repel Mara and come to full understanding, not purely of themselves, but of the way it is. Through this, in the third watch of the night, the Buddha came to realize the Four Noble Truths, the way of living beyond self. So I'll read that first sentence, first little bit again, because that was quite densely packed there. All we can know is that we are, in italics, although the definition of what we are is subject to views and opinions. Is it possible to leave that suchness, that isness of being, unconditioned by our attempts to define it? So can we take that quality of isness or suchness, that tata is called tatata in Pali, can we just let that quality of suchness be realized without trying to write a poem about it, or trying to conceive it or picture it or do something with it? Can that just be known and embodied? Is it possible to abide in that apparent emptiness until we taste the freedom that enriches it? So, because the habit of becoming, bhavatanha, is always uncomfortable with undefined being. You always want to be something. Even being a failure, or being a problem, or being sick is often far preferable to undefined being. So we love to have enemies. We need to have someone that's a problem, because if they're a problem, then I exist in relationship to them, and I've got all these opinions about how you should be. So if I've got a problem with Annie, then I can carry Annie around all day long, and it gives me a sense of being, because then that woman, what she did, and it's just the mind takes a convenient object. And so one of the most disarming and painful things to do is to be deprived of a problem or an enemy. Or that's why when we get what we desire, often the first experience is one of disappointment. Oh no, I've been longing for that for so long. Now what am I going to want? Because I was identified with the longing, or I was identified with the hating or the fearing. Oh my goodness, nothing to fear. Quick, give me a problem. I need a problem. And if you notice, if you watch the mind closely, when Say it's ordinary, in an ordinary mundane way. Say you're doing some kind of a job like cleaning up or tidying or working on a project, and you've been quite physically involved, and you've been going for a few hours, and then you plunk yourself down and you go, thank goodness. So there's a few seconds of relief, like 3 or 4 seconds, I find. And then the mind starts to look for something to worry about. And we feel uncomfortable with peace. The becoming habit doesn't like peace. It wants, because in that moment there's no thing to do, no thing to be, and so we're trying to find something to worry about, or something to do, or something to be excited about, or something to be tested by, or something, so that I can exist in relationship to that. Looking for something to push against, so we'll feel like that we're somebody. And so that the development of the third noble truth, as you remember back when talking about that section, Sucitto Bhante, it is to be realized that there's a lot to do with letting the heart rest with suchness, with emptiness, with just undefined being. Because the habits of self-view and self-creation, anything will do, any old garbage will do. Give me a problem, give me something, give me a memory, give me an argument I had when I was in primary school. Anything, something, just give me something. And you can see the mind, it's quite shameless, just sort of hunting around, like going through the trunks in the attic, looking for something to create an identity in relationship to. And so that quality of realization of dukkha nirodha is a lot to do with recognizing that hungering, that hankering, and saying no, just leave it alone, let it be. And when that is really realized, there's that Satchikatanti, it has been realized, then there's a tremendous freedom. But it's very hard just to stay with those waves of hungering and to just leave them alone. Someone who had insight into this, you might be surprised, was Marilyn Monroe. So, in the film Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, she sings a very insightful song called "When You Get What You Want, You Don't Want It Anymore." So the message is out there in all kinds of dimensions. When you get what you want, you don't want it anymore. And then when you've got it, then the interesting moment is to look at that sense of disappointment, or it's just this, or starting to look for the next thing and say, you see, she was right. Okay, so the Buddha is sitting on top of this knot of eternity, which he's not entangled with, and then the illustration depicts in the center of the Buddha's body a mandala, that's a yantra, technically, a spiritual theme formed into a symbol for the purpose of meditation. This particular mandala represents the union of male and female as the polarities of the universe. We can list what goes under those polarities: active-passive, constriction-expansion, form-space, and so on. As in the previous painting, the main theme here is the harmonizing of all positions. When there is unity, there is no other to flow towards or away from. When there's harmony based on a fundamental resolution of all the potential dualities, there is no possibility of desire for one of them. There's no taking a position in the masculine to be drawn towards or away from the feminine. This point of resolution is the supreme liberation, the irreversible termination of the outflows, because there's nothing to flow out to. The Buddha has lived it out. Now he is no longer fooled by any condition, any position, or any self, quote unquote. Hence he is no longer convinced that anyone is really that which is born and dies, because it becomes obvious that that true being, or isness, is more than a matter of temporarily holding to a position. With this insight he can live with total sensitivity and compassion in a world of suffering beings, without anxiety or despair. As he doesn't take hold As he doesn't take or hold any position regarding conditioned phenomena, he has all the possibilities of relating to them. His mind is open, free from bias, self-interest, unresolved traumas and the rest of it. Nor is he biased towards not experiencing conditions. It's not the case that he doesn't bother with the phenomenal world either. His liberation from suffering is, therefore, a source of faith as well as an inspiration for practice for all beings. Homage to the Tathagata. So again, I'll just read that part of this paragraph just to clarify that principle. The Buddha has lived it out. Now he is no longer fooled by any condition, any position, or any self. Hence he is no longer convinced that anyone is really that which is born and dies, because it becomes obvious that that true being or isness is more than a matter of temporarily holding to a position. So, like I was saying yesterday, I was using the image of waves coming into the shore. That is just recognizing, well, this life is just a wave. Is the sea diminished when a wave breaks? Has the sea lost anything when a wave rolls in and breaks on the shore? The sea is not diminished by a wave passing through it. Or another image, different image to use about this sort of supreme objectivity over birth and death. It's rather like we say the sun rises in the east in the morning and sets in the west in the evening. But that the sun doesn't rise and set, according to ordinary versions of astronomy and the universe, but it's because of the spinning of the earth. As long as we're sitting on the surface of the planet, we see the sun rising and setting. But the rising and setting, the birth and death, is only apparent because of the position that we're in. If you take the position of the sun, then there's this little blue dot that you can see sort of revolving off in the vastness of space. There's no identification with which particular where in the rotation that little blue dot, the little blue and green bubble is. It's because the mind is, to just use that analogy, is occupying the isness of the sun. It's a central position. And then the births and deaths, hopes and fears, in-breath, out-breath, gains and losses, are just the spinning of that little wee green and blue bubble, off in the vastness of space. What does the sun know of its risings and settings? It's not involved. It can see the spinning, but it's not identified with it in any way. With this insight, he can live with total sensitivity and compassion in a world of suffering beings, without anxiety or despair. So, along with patience, the English word patience being a bit problematic and implying a quality of sort of gritted teeth and the skill of waiting, compassion is also not the right word, because literally compassion means to suffer with. It comes from the Latin compassio, com meaning with, passio to suffer. So compassion in English means to suffer with. But compassion in Buddhist psychology is not a state of suffering. So karuna, to feel compassion for another, does not produce suffering in the person who's experiencing or cultivating compassion. It's not a state of suffering. And the Buddha, at one point, says if suffering arises on account of the development of compassion, then that karuna is tainted. It's incomplete. It's distorted. It's not true compassion. So probably the better English word is empathy, to empathize with the suffering of another being. Compassion is more the term that gets used, but it's also, as he's saying, that the Buddha, the awakened one, can live in the world of suffering beings without being caused suffering on account of that. There's another word that's related to karuna, which is anukampa, like when we do the chant for the requesting a Dhamma talk, anukampi mang pajang. And anukampati means literally to resonate with or to tremble, and so that that gets translated as the Buddha trembling for the welfare of all beings. So there's a sense of empathizing or concern, but that also without that being a state of suffering. As he doesn't take hold But as he doesn't take or hold any position regarding conditioned phenomena, he has all the possibilities of relating to them. Because you're not identifying with any particular spot on the face of the earth, then you can relate to all of them equally. It's one of the reasons why Ajahn Chah people would ask him about celibacy, and why don't you have a wife and children, and then you'd be a great father. And he said, well, if I have my own personal family, then I can't relate to all the other beings of the world in an equal way. And so that by adopting the quality of celibacy, then you at least even on the social level, you take the position of being able to relate to all beings in an equal and unbiased way. That he said, if you're celibate, then everyone becomes your family. But if you've got your own partner and children and so on, then you have to relate to them in a different way. They are karmically in a different category. His mind is open, free from bias, self-interest, unresolved traumas, and the rest of it. Nor is he biased towards not experiencing conditions. As I was saying, like the liberated mind is not afraid of respecting the conditioned world. It's not pushing it away or neglecting it or looking down on it or dismissing it. So along with being totally liberated, the Buddha was also extremely careful and scrupulous about all his actions and every word that he spoke. It's not the case that he doesn't bother with the phenomenal world either. His liberation from suffering is, therefore, a source of faith as well as an inspiration for practice for all beings. Homage to the Tathagata. So, it's the end of that chapter. So, any questions? Clarifications? Yes, Walter.
Viraja, I don't understand the term of outflow.
Mm-hmm.
I just can imagine, but I don't really understand it. Maybe you can understand it.
Well, outflow is the word asava. It has there's another one that's translated in various different ways. It has the implications both of flowing and also of rotting. Something that's so Ajahn Thanissaro uses the word effluent, the effluence, which literally does mean flowing out, but also sounds like sewage as well, like from a drain. So when you say, but nobody else uses effluent. I mean, he carries on. He's determined to get certain terms translated in particular ways, like nibbana is unbinding in his vernacular. And the asava, effluence, but it always brings to mind sewage pipes to me, and I can't really get. And then you get these weird terms, effluentless. Yeah. So I.B. Horner and the Pali Text Society, they often would translate asava as cankers, and a canker is like a kind of rotting tumor, like a sore that's got lots of pus and such like. And so you get these strange terms like when someone who's the asava have diminished or have stopped. So Ajahn Thanissaro uses the term effluentless, which is pretty strange. But the I.B. Horner and the Pali text people, they come up with canker waned. To wane, like the waning moon or the diminishing. So that. And the Pali term is kinasava, like the kina is to end or to stop, so that it comes out as 500 canker-waned arahants. So even if English is your first language, it's a pretty weird kind of a comment. So I prefer the more everyday term outflows, because what it's representing is, say, the attention flowing out into an object, like that you're. And there's 4 different kinds of asava that are talked about. So you have kamasava, the mind flowing out into sense desire, like wanting a particular taste or wanting a particular visual object or a sound that's attractive. The mind absorbs into something, a beautiful piece of music or delicious food or a beautiful thing to look at. So that would be kamasava. And I think that that we can all relate to that. When we say getting lost in something, that's an outflow. You've gone into it and you got lost in it. I was totally absorbed in that book. I got really sucked into that movie. So it's exactly that. The mind pulled into an object. So then, so Kamasava is the first one. K long A M A Kamasava. And then Bhavasava, the outflow of becoming. So being, say, looking into the future, and absorbed in planning for the future. The ambition, what you're going to become, what you're going to get. And not necessarily around sense desire. It can also be, I want to become a stream enterer. I want to become, if Sarakani the drunk can do it, I can do it. Yeah, I'm going to become. So that's bhavasava, the outflow of becoming. Then ditthasava is views and opinions. Ditti is a view. So believing in your opinions. When you say, I think Theravada Buddhism is great, Mahayana Buddhism is rubbish, Theravada is the best. And so that's ditthasava, the mind absorbing into an opinion or a view, and that's kind of believing that your thought is an absolute truth. So that again, the mind lost in a view or an opinion and born into that. And then the fourth one is avijjasava, as in ignorance, and so that's a bit more general, but it you could say it's really the mind flowing out into the basic ignorant point of view of I am, the feeling of identity. I'm experiencing, so it's not necessarily caught up in an opinion or an ambition or a sense desire, but just caught in the I am, and there's the world out there. I am this. That's one way of looking at avijjasava. So the mind is absorbed and lost in that I am this person feeling, that attitude. So that I don't know if that clarifies it at all. And so that the arahantship is the ending of the asavas. So the mind stops flowing out and getting caught up. It doesn't get absorbed. So there's still seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, opinions arise and pass away. But if the mind if the asavas are stopped, the mind is not flowing out. As Master Hua, who was when he came here in 1989, he brought a large group of his students, nuns and monks, to visit Britain and Europe, and one of the questions somebody asked him when he was here is that you're abbot of 20 or so monasteries, you have thousands and thousands of disciples and so many calls on your time, and people are coming to see you and ask for teachings all day long. How do you manage to deal with all this activity? And like City of 10,000 Buddhas, their main place in California, has not just one school, it has 4 schools and a university in the monastery. A senior and junior girls' school, and a senior and junior boys' school, and a university, and the monastic training for all the monks that are there. It's a huge place, and that's just one place, and he has like about 20 different places around the world. And he made the comment, I don't go out, I stay in. And it was just a very, very simple statement. So I don't go out. Not meaning that he didn't go out of buildings, or he just, when he's with people, he says, I don't go out, I stay in. And as they asked a few more questions about it, well, what about like if you're having a face-to-face conversation and someone's got really upset or really excited, or how do you maintain that kind of clarity when it's a real sort of face-to-face personal contact like that? And what he said was that I don't look them in the eyes, I look between their eyes. Because looking at someone right in the eyes is a guaranteed way to lose yourself. That's what just in a personal conversation, that's how you get lost. That's how you go out. You're drawn into the other because the eyes are so powerful. So he said that, just a little kind of handy hint. just look at the spot between their eyes rather than into their eyes. Says, they won't notice, but you can still maintain that quality of clarity as you're engaging.